The grand chamber of the Galactic Assembly stretched out like a massive bowl carved from black stone and silver metal. Thousands of seats rose in circular tiers around a central platform, where speakers addressed the gathered representatives. Soft blue lights glowed from hidden panels in the walls, and holographic symbols floated above each delegation's pod, marking their species and Ambassador Daniel Cooper sat in the human delegation's small pod at the far edge of the chamber. It was not a good location. The spot was reserved for new members, for species that the older civilizations considered unimportant. Humanity had only discovered faster-than-light travel 18 years ago, and they had joined the Galactic Assembly just 3 years before this day. Most of the aliens in this room thought of humans as children who had somehow wandered into an adult gathering. Daniel was a tall man with hair and calm brown eyes. He was 52 years old and had spent most of his life as a history professor at a university in Boston. When Earth's government needed diplomats who understood how civilizations rose and fell, they came looking for people like him. He had accepted the position because he believed humanity needed wise voices in the stars, not just brave ones. His aide, Lieutenant Mills, sat beside him. She was 30 years old with sharp features and brown hair pulled back in a tight bun. She had served in the military before transferring to the diplomatic corps, and she still carried herself like a soldier. Right now, her eyes moved across the chamber, watching the alien delegates with careful attention. On the central platform, High Chancellor of the Dominion was speaking. Was a tall reptilian creature with scales that covered his entire body. His eyes were yellow with vertical black pupils, and when he spoke, his forked tongue occasionally flicked out between his words. They had been part of the Galactic Assembly for over 2,000 years, and they considered themselves one of the leading voices in galactic politics. The situation grows worse with each passing cycle, announced. His voice was deep and carried easily through the acoustic systems built into the chamber. The swarm has consumed 3 more systems in the outer regions. The colony worlds of the Republic have been completely destroyed. We have confirmed that 12 billion sentient beings have perished. A wave of murmuring passed through the assembled delegates. Daniel watched their reactions carefully. Some seemed genuinely horrified. Others looked merely tired, as if this was simply the latest in a long series of bad news that they had grown numb to hearing. The swarm had emerged from the galactic core 20 years ago. No one knew where they had come from or why they had suddenly appeared. They were a hive-minded species that existed only to consume. Their ships were living creatures, grown rather than built, and they descended on inhabited worlds like locusts on a wheat field. They ate everything organic, every plant, every animal, every person. When they finished with a world, nothing remained but bare rock and empty oceans. Every civilization in the assembly had tried to fight them at some point. They had sent their proud fleet of warships. The Confederacy had deployed their advanced energy weapons. The Republic had sacrificed thousands of soldiers in desperate defensive actions. None of it had worked. They simply had too many ships, too many soldiers, too much hunger. They absorbed losses that would have crippled any other species and kept coming. Now, after 20 years of war, the combined forces of the Galactic Assembly could barely slow the swarm's advance. They had given up on victory. They spoke only of buying time, of controlled retreats, of saving what could be saved. Leaned close to Daniel and whispered, "They're not even looking at us. We might as well be furniture." Daniel nodded slightly. She was right. None of the other delegations had glanced toward the human pod even once during the session. To them, humanity was irrelevant to this discussion. Earth had 12 known interstellar vessels. They had millions. What could humans possibly contribute to a war of such scale? "That's about to change," Daniel replied quietly. On the central platform, Ambassador of the Confederacy had risen to speak. She was a beautiful creature by human standards, with pale blue skin and dozens of thin tendrils that grew from her head where a human would have hair. These tendrils glowed with soft bioluminescence that changed color based on her emotional state. Right now, they were dim, and reflecting her despair. "We must face the truth that this assembly has refused to accept," said. Her voice was melodic, almost like singing. "There is no military solution to the threat. We cannot defeat them. We can only hope to survive them." "What are you proposing?" demanded a delegate from the Republic. They were small, furry creatures with large ears and quick movements. This particular delegate had lost family in the recent attacks, and his voice shook with barely controlled emotion. "Evacuation," answered. "We must begin systematic evacuation of the mid-rim territories. We must pull back our populations to the core worlds where we can establish stronger defensive positions. Some worlds will be sacrificed so that others might survive." The chamber erupted in arguments. Some delegates shouted their support for the plan. Others condemned it as cowardice. The representatives screamed that they were willing to sacrifice others because their own worlds were safely located far from the front lines. Daniel watched it all with a heavy heart. He had studied enough history to recognize what he was seeing. This was how civilizations died, not in one great battle, but in slow retreat, in endless compromise, in the gradual acceptance that defeat was inevitable. These aliens had been fighting for 2 decades, and they had lost something more important than ships or soldiers. They had lost hope. High Chancellor struck his ceremonial staff against the floor, producing a thunderous boom that silenced the arguing delegates. "We will take a recess to allow tempers to cool," he announced. "When we reconvene, we will vote on Ambassador's evacuation proposal." As the delegates began to rise and move toward the exits, Daniel remained in his seat, looked at him with concern. "Sir, the recess has been called." "I know." Daniel took a deep breath. He had been preparing for this moment for months. He had rehearsed what he would say 100 times. He had studied the protocols, the procedures, the proper ways to address the assembly, and he had decided to ignore most of them. "When they reconvene," he told, "I'm going to request permission to address the assembly." His eyes widened. "Sir, we have observer status only in military matters. They won't allow it." "They'll allow it," Daniel said, "because I'm not going to give them a choice." He stood up and straightened his diplomatic uniform. It was dark blue with silver trim, designed to look professional without being threatening. He wondered if the aliens would still think it looked harmless after they heard what he had to say. "I need you to do something for me." "Anything, sir." "When I start speaking, send the signal to Earth. Tell them it's time." Stared at him for a long moment, then she nodded slowly. "Understood, Ambassador." Daniel walked toward the central platform as delegates filed past him without a second glance. He was just another human, after all. What could he possibly have to say that would matter to the great civilizations of the galaxy? They were about to find out. The recess lasted exactly 1 standard hour. During that time, the delegates mingled in the corridors outside the main chamber, forming small groups to discuss the evacuation proposal. Some drank strange beverages from dispensers designed to serve 100 different biologies. Others simply stood in corners, their alien faces impossible for humans to read. Daniel Cooper did not join them. He remained near the central platform, standing quietly with his hands clasped behind his back. A few delegates glanced at him curiously as they passed, wondering why the human ambassador was standing there like a statue. Most simply ignored him. Had sent the signal to Earth. Somewhere across the vast distances of space, the message was traveling through relay stations and communication buoys. It would reach the United Earth government within minutes, and then everything would begin to move. When the delegates returned to their seats and High Chancellor called the session back to order, Daniel was already walking toward the central platform. "High Chancellor," he called out, his voice cutting through the murmur of settling delegates, "I request permission to address the assembly." His yellow eyes fixed on Daniel with obvious annoyance. The leader had been about to begin the vote on the evacuation proposal. He had not expected interruptions from the humans of all species. Ambassador Cooper said slowly, "Humanity holds observer status in military matters. Your species has not earned the right to speak in such discussions. With respect, Chancellor, I believe the Assembly should hear what I have to say." "And why is that?" "Because it will change everything you think you know about this war." A ripple of surprise moved through the chamber. Delegates exchanged glances. Some laughed quietly. Others simply stared at the human with expressions that ranged from confusion to contempt. Ambassador of the Confederacy leaned forward in her pod. Her tendrils had shifted to a pale yellow color that indicated curiosity. "High Chancellor, perhaps we should allow the human to speak. If nothing else, it will provide a moment of entertainment before the vote." Several delegates chuckled at this. Daniel kept his face calm. He had expected mockery. He had prepared for it. Considered for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Very well. Ambassador Cooper, you may speak briefly. Do not waste the Assembly's time." "Thank you, Chancellor." Daniel walked up the steps to the central platform and took his place at the speaker's podium. From here, he could see every delegation in the chamber. Hundreds of alien faces looked back at him, most with expressions of boredom or mild interest. They expected nothing important from him. They believed humanity was too young, too weak, too primitive to matter. "3 years ago," Daniel began, "when humanity first joined this assembly, we were given very clear instructions. We were told to remain quiet. We were told to learn. We were told to stay out of the way and not interfere with matters beyond our understanding." He paused and looked around the chamber. "We were told that we were children who had somehow stumbled into a gathering of adults. We were told that our opinions did not matter, our voices did not count, and our concerns were not relevant to the great civilizations of the galaxy." The delegate who had lost family to the shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The representatives exchanged glances. No one had expected the human to start his speech by repeating the insults that had been directed at his species. "We listened to those instructions," Daniel continued. "We learned, we stayed quiet, and while we stayed quiet, we watched." His voice grew harder. "We watched the swarm devour world after world. We watched this assembly debate and retreat, debate and retreat. We watched 12 billion citizens die while their allies argued about evacuation protocols." The delegate's large ears flattened against his head. Several other delegates shifted in their seats, uncomfortable with the direction of this speech. Ambassador Cooper warned, "You are approaching disrespectful territory." "I am approaching honest territory," Daniel replied. "Something this assembly has avoided for far too long." He placed his hands on the podium and leaned forward slightly. "For 3 years, humanity has been treated as irrelevant. For 3 years, we have been dismissed as primitives who discovered technology by accident and have nothing to offer the galaxy. For 3 years, we have been silent." Daniel straightened up and spoke his next words clearly and firmly. "Today, that silence ends. I am here to inform this assembly that the United Earth government has voted unanimously on a resolution. Humanity is joining this fight." For a moment there was complete silence in the chamber. Then the laughter began. It started with the delegation. Himself let out a deep, rumbling chuckle that echoed through the acoustic systems. Within seconds, the laughter had spread through the entire chamber. Delegates from a dozen species pointed at Daniel and laughed openly. Even Eve allowed herself a small smile, though her tendrils flickered with something that might have been embarrassment on Daniel's behalf. Daniel stood quietly and waited. He had known this would happen. He had prepared for it. "Ambassador Cooper," said when the laughter had subsided enough for him to speak, "your courage is admirable if foolish. But humanity possesses exactly 12 interstellar vessels. 12. The swarm has consumed fleets of thousands. Your declaration of war is meaningless." "You're right about one thing," Daniel said calmly. 12 vessels would be meaningless. He reached into his pocket and removed a small device. It was a holographic projector, standard diplomatic equipment that every ambassador carried. But the information stored on this particular device was anything but standard. 12 vessels is what we showed you, Daniel continued. 12 vessels is what we allowed you to see. But Chancellor, did you really believe that humanity, a species that has spent its entire existence fighting wars against itself, would be satisfied with 12 exploration ships? He activated the projector. A massive holographic display appeared above the central platform, visible to every delegate in the chamber. The laughter died instantly. The display showed images of shipyards, not small facilities for building a handful of vessels, but enormous construction complexes hidden throughout Earth's solar system. Shipyards built inside hollowed-out asteroids. Shipyards floating in the upper atmosphere of gas giants. Shipyards buried beneath the surface of moons. And in each shipyard, dozens of warships. 347 vessels, Daniel announced. Not exploration ships, not diplomatic cruisers, warships, built specifically and exclusively to fight the swarm. The chamber had gone completely silent, stared at the holographic display with his mouth slightly open. Tendrils had shifted to a deep purple color that Daniel's briefings had not covered. "This is impossible," whispered the delegate. "We would have detected such construction." "You detected what we wanted you to detect," Daniel replied. "Humanity learned very quickly that the Galactic Assembly does not trust newcomers. We knew that if you discovered we were building a military fleet, you would have demanded we stop. You would have called us aggressive, dangerous, a threat to galactic peace." He changed the display to show a single warship in detail. It was sleek and angular, designed for combat rather than beauty. Weapons systems covered its hull. "So we hid. We built our fleet in secret while we publicly played the role of harmless primitives. We let you laugh at us. We let you ignore us. And all the while we were preparing." Daniel looked directly at High Chancellor. "You accused humanity of deception, Chancellor. You were right. We deceived you. But we did not deceive you out of malice or ambition. We deceived you because we knew this day would come. We knew that eventually that would push the galaxy to the edge of extinction. And we knew that when that day came, someone would need to push back." He deactivated the projector. "That someone is us." The silence in the chamber lasted for what felt like hours but was probably only seconds. Every alien face was turned toward Daniel Cooper, and for the first time since humanity had joined the Galactic Assembly, not a single one of them was laughing. High Chancellor recovered first. His yellow eyes had narrowed to thin slits, and his scales had darkened to an almost black color. When became angry, their scales changed shade. Daniel had read about this in his briefing materials, but seeing it in person was something else entirely. "You admit to deceiving the Galactic Assembly," growled. "You admit to building a secret military force while pretending to be harmless. This is a violation of the Charter. This is grounds for immediate expulsion." "Perhaps," Daniel agreed calmly. "But before you vote on expulsion, Chancellor, perhaps you should consider what humanity is offering." "Offering?" The delegate rose from his seat, his fur bristling with a mixture of emotions that Daniel could not read. "You have built weapons in secret. You have lied to every species in this chamber. What could you possibly offer that would excuse such behavior?" "Victory." The single word hung in the air. Daniel let it settle before continuing. "For 20 years, the civilizations of this assembly have fought the swarm. And for 20 years you have lost. Not because you lack courage or technology or numbers. You have lost because you have been fighting the wrong war." He reactivated his holographic projector. This time, the display showed detailed maps of territory, their expansion patterns, and the locations of every major battle that had been fought against them. They are not intelligent in the way we understand intelligence. They do not plan. They do not strategize. They simply consume. They move toward the nearest source of organic matter and they eat it. When they encounter resistance, they overwhelm it with numbers. When they cannot overwhelm it, they wait until they have grown strong enough to try again. Of the Confederacy leaned forward. Her tendrils had shifted to a deep blue color, indicating that she was thinking carefully about what she was hearing. This is known, Ambassador. We have studied thee extensively. You have studied them, Daniel agreed. But you have not understood them. You see their lack of individual intelligence as a weakness, but it is also a strength. They do not feel fear. They do not retreat. They do not surrender. They simply keep coming, wave after wave, until their enemies are exhausted. He changed the display to show a timeline of the war. Look at the pattern of your defeats. In almost every case, the Assembly's forces won the initial engagement. Your ships are more advanced. Your weapons are more powerful. But they do not need to win the first battle. They only need to survive it. And then they return with more ships and more ships and more ships until your forces are worn down and destroyed. The chamber was completely silent now. Every delegate was listening intently. The Assembly has been fighting a defensive war, Daniel continued. You wait for them to attack, you try to stop them, and when you fail, you retreat. You have never once launched a major offensive against territory. You have never once tried to take the fight to them. Because it would be suicide, snapped. The core systems contain billions of ships. Any fleet we sent against them would be destroyed. Any fleet using your current tactics would be destroyed, Daniel corrected. But what if there were another way? He changed the display again. This time it showed a complex battle plan with arrows and symbols that indicated fleet movements and attack vectors. For 18 years, humanity has studied every battle against them. We have analyzed their tactics, their behavior patterns, their biological responses to different types of weapons. We have run thousands of simulations, and we have identified something that the Assembly has missed. Mills watched from the human pod, her heart pounding. She had seen parts of this presentation before, but hearing Daniel deliver it to the entire Galactic Assembly was something else entirely. They are not a unified force, Daniel explained. They appear to act as one, but in reality, they are organized around 17 central nodes. These nodes are massive organic structures that serve as communication hubs for the swarm. Each node controls the forces in its region of space. Destroy a node, and every connected to it becomes confused and disorganized. They do not die, but they lose coordination. They become individual creatures rather than parts of a greater whole. His tendrils had turned a bright white color. You are certain of this? We are certain. We have tested it in small engagements that we arranged to look like accidents. Isolated forces that wander too close to human space have occasionally suffered equipment failures. Daniel allowed himself a small smile. Those failures were not accidents. They were weapons tests. The implications of this statement rippled through the chamber. Humanity had not just built a secret fleet. They had been conducting secret military operations. The 17 nodes are spread throughout territory, Daniel continued. They are heavily defended, but not as heavily defended as the core systems. If we strike all 17 nodes simultaneously, we can cripple the swarm's coordination across a vast region of space. They will not be destroyed, but they will be scattered, confused, vulnerable. And you believe your 300 ships can accomplish this? Asked. His tone had changed. There was still anger in his voice, but also something else. Curiosity, interest. No, Daniel admitted. 300 ships cannot strike 17 targets simultaneously while also defending against counterattacks. But 300 human ships, combined with the fleets of the Galactic Assembly, could accomplish this objective. He deactivated the projector and looked around the chamber. This is what humanity offers. Not just ships, but a strategy. Not just weapons, but a plan to use them. We offer the thing that this assembly has lacked for 20 years: hope. The delegate who had been so hostile earlier now looked conflicted. His fur had settled, and his large ears were tilted forward, listening carefully. "Why?" he asked quietly. "Why would humanity do this? You could have stayed hidden. You could have waited until they reached your territory and then used your secret fleet to defend your own worlds. Why reveal yourselves now? Why risk everything to help species that have treated you with contempt?" Daniel considered the question carefully before answering. "Because we are not that kind of species," he said finally. "Humanity has made many mistakes throughout our history. We have been cruel to each other. We have fought wars over foolish things. We have nearly destroyed ourselves more than once." He paused. "But we have also learned. We have learned that survival alone is not enough. We have learned that a universe where we hide while others suffer is not a universe worth living in. We have learned that the measure of a species is not how they treat their friends, but how they treat those who have given them nothing." Daniel looked directly at the delegate. "Your people have suffered terribly. The assembly treated you as acceptable losses. Humanity is not willing to accept that. We are not willing to watch more worlds burn while we have the power to help." The chamber was silent for a long moment. Then Ambassador of the Confederacy rose from her seat. Her tendrils glowed with a soft golden light that Daniel's briefings told him indicated respect. "I have a question for Ambassador Cooper," she said. "If the Assembly agrees to join humanity in this offensive, what guarantees do we have that humans will not use their fleet against us after they are defeated?" It was the question Daniel had been expecting, the question that every delegate was thinking but had been afraid to ask. "None," he answered honestly. "I can give you no guarantees. I can only give you my word that humanity did not build this fleet to conquer. We built it to protect." He spread his hands. "But consider this. If we wanted to conquer you, why would we reveal our fleet now? Why would we share our strategy? Why would we offer to fight alongside you? A species planning conquest would wait until you had exhausted yourselves against then sweep in to claim what remained." He shook his head. "We are not here to conquer. We are here to fight. The only question is whether you will fight alongside us." The chamber erupted into chaos the moment Daniel finished speaking. Delegates shouted at each other in a dozen different languages. Translation systems struggled to keep pace with the overlapping voices. Some representatives had risen from their seats and were gesturing wildly. Others sat frozen, still trying to process what they had just heard. High Chancellor slammed his ceremonial staff against the floor 3 times, but the noise barely registered above the din. He tried twice more before finally giving up and simply waiting for the delegates to exhaust themselves. Mills watched from the human pod, her hands gripping the armrests so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. She had known this moment would be chaotic, but the reality was more intense than she had imagined. The fate of humanity's relationship with the galaxy was being decided in this room, and all she could do was watch. Eventually, the shouting began to die down. Delegates returned to their seats, though many continued to whisper urgently to their aides and colleagues. The chamber had divided itself into visible factions. Some delegates were clearly hostile, their body language radiating anger and suspicion. Others appeared intrigued, leaning forward with expressions of cautious interest. A small number seemed genuinely excited, as if they had been waiting for someone to say what Daniel had said. Finally spoke. "Ambassador Cooper, you have given this assembly much to consider. Your revelation has changed the nature of this discussion entirely." "That was the intention, Chancellor." "Indeed." His yellow eyes studied Daniel with new respect, though his voice remained cold. "However, you must understand that the Assembly cannot simply accept your proposal without extensive deliberation. There are questions of trust, of coordination, of command structure. Even if we wish to join your offensive, the logistics would require months of planning." "We don't have months," Daniel replied. They are advancing. Every day we delay, more worlds fall, more lives are lost. And yet you expect us to rush into a military alliance with a species that has just admitted to deceiving us for nearly 2 decades. Before Daniel could respond, Ambassador of the Confederacy rose from her seat. Her tendrils had shifted to a deep crimson color that Daniel had not seen before. According to his briefings, crimson indicated strong emotion, but the specific nature of that emotion was unclear. High Chancellor, if I may speak, nodded reluctantly, walked down from her delegation's pod and approached the central platform. She moved gracefully, her long robes trailing behind her as she climbed the steps to stand beside Daniel. I have been part of this assembly for 47 years, she said, addressing the gathered delegates. In that time, I have watched them consume everything in their path. I have attended memorial services for fallen worlds. I have voted for evacuation after evacuation, retreat after retreat. She turned to look at Daniel. And in all that time, not once has anyone stood before this assembly and offered hope. The chamber fell silent. Ambassador Cooper has deceived us. This is true. Humanity has built a secret fleet and hidden it from our observation. This is also true, but consider why they did this. Consider what they were preparing for. Tendrils shifted to a golden color. They were preparing to fight, not to defend their own territory and let the rest of us burn, not to wait until the war was over and pick through the remains. They were preparing to help us, to save us. She looked around the chamber. How many of our species can say the same? How many of us have been building secret weapons to save ourselves while our neighbors fall? How many of us have been planning our escape routes instead of our counterattacks? The delegate looked down at his console, unable to meet his gaze. Several other delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The humans have done what none of us had the courage to do, continued. They have looked at this war and decided that it can be won. They have built the tools to win it, and now they are offering to share those tools with us. She extended one slender hand toward Daniel. The Confederacy has decided. If humanity commits to this offensive, the Confederacy will stand with them. We will contribute our fleet, our technology, and our soldiers to this fight. We will follow Ambassador Cooper's battle plan and strike at them with everything we have. A murmur ran through the chamber. The Confederacy was one of the largest and most powerful members of the Assembly. Their support carried enormous weight. Daniel inclined his head gratefully. Thank you, Ambassador. The people of Earth are honored by your trust. Do not thank me yet, replied quietly. We have a war to win first. From across the chamber, another delegate rose. This was Commander of the Republic, the same delegate who had earlier questioned humanity's motives. His fur was still slightly bristled, but his large ears were tilted forward in an expression that suggested openness rather than hostility. My people have suffered more than most in this war, said. We have lost worlds, we have lost families, we have lost hope. He looked at Daniel with an intensity that was almost painful. I do not trust you, human. I do not understand your species, and I do not believe that anyone acts without selfish motives. Daniel nodded, accepting the criticism. But continued, I also do not have the luxury of waiting for trust to develop. My people are dying. If there is even a small chance that your plan can save them, I must take it. He straightened his small body with visible effort. The Republic will join this alliance. We will fight alongside humanity we will take the battle to and we will make them pay for what they have done to our worlds. One by one, other delegations began to rise. The Collective, a species of hive-minded insects who had lost several colony worlds to the Empire, an ancient civilization that had watched its younger allies fall while they debated whether to intervene. A species of crystalline beings who rarely spoke in assembly meetings, but now announced their support in voices like breaking glass. Not every delegation joined. The remained seated, scales still dark with anger and suspicion. Several smaller species aligned with the also stayed silent. But as Daniel watched, he realized that a majority of the assembly was rising to their feet. High Chancellor observed the scene with visible frustration. His political position as leader of the assembly depended on the maintaining their influence over other species. If a majority of the assembly joined an alliance that they had opposed, it would be a serious blow to their prestige. "It seems," said slowly, "that the assembly is inclined to support Ambassador Cooper's proposal." "It seems so," Daniel agreed. Studied him for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, the leader let out a low chuckle. "You have outmaneuvered us, Ambassador. I underestimated your species. I will not make that mistake again." He rose from his seat, his scales gradually lightening back to their normal. "The Dominion cannot stand aside while others fight for the survival of the galaxy. It would be shameful. It would be remembered for generations." Walked down from his elevated position and approached the central platform. He climbed the steps and stood facing Daniel. "I do not trust you," he said, echoing Commander's words. "But I respect what you have done here today. You have given this assembly something it had lost long ago: purpose." He extended his clawed hand in a gesture that Daniel's briefings identified as an offer of alliance. "The Dominion will join your fight, Ambassador Cooper. We will commit our fleet and our warriors. And when this war is over, we will discuss the matter of your species' deception." Daniel took the Chancellor's hand and shook it firmly. "I look forward to that discussion, Chancellor. But first, we have a war to win." Mills finally allowed herself to breathe. She had not realized she had been holding her breath for the past several minutes. The alliance was formed. The plan was in motion. Now came the hard part. 2 weeks had passed since the historic vote in the Galactic Assembly. In that time, the galaxy had transformed from a collection of retreating civilizations into a unified military force preparing for the largest offensive in recorded history. Ambassador Daniel Cooper stood on the observation deck of the carrier ship Perseverance, flagship of the human fleet. Through the massive viewport, he could see hundreds of vessels from a dozen different species forming up in precise battle formations. Warships with their distinctive angular hulls floated alongside the organic-looking vessels of the Confederacy. Assault cruisers, small but heavily armed, darted between the larger ships like fish swimming among whales. And everywhere, human warships. The secret fleet that had been hidden for so long was now revealed in all its deadly glory. 347 vessels of various sizes, from small gunships to massive carriers like the Perseverance. Their hulls were painted in dark colors, designed to absorb sensor signals rather than reflect them. Every surface bristled with weapons. Admiral Lisa Grant approached Daniel from behind. She was a sharp-eyed woman in her early 60s with silver hair cut short and a face lined by decades of military service. She had been selected to command the human fleet because she was the best tactical mind Earth had ever produced. "Ambassador, you should be back on the diplomatic station," she said. "This is a combat zone. You're not a soldier." "I made a promise to the Assembly," Daniel replied without turning from the viewport. "I told them humanity would fight. I intend to be here when that promise is kept." Lisa stood beside him and looked out at the assembled fleet. "It's quite a sight, isn't it? I never thought I'd see something like this." "Neither did I when I was a history professor. I studied wars from humanity's past. I never imagined I'd be part of one that would decide the fate of the entire galaxy." Mills appeared at Daniel's other side. She carried and looked slightly nervous, which was unusual for her. In the weeks since the Assembly vote, she had proven herself invaluable in coordinating communications between the human delegation and their new allies. "Sir, High Chancellor has transmitted a message. He's leading the fleet personally." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "The Chancellor is here. I thought he would direct operations from a safe distance." Apparently they have a tradition. Their leaders must share the risks they ask others to take, smiled slightly. He said that if humans can fight, can certainly stand beside them. The old lizard has more courage than I gave him credit for, Daniel admitted. Through the viewport, the first ships became visible against the distant stars. They appeared as dark shapes at first, barely distinguishable from the void around them. But as the sensors focused on them, the shapes resolved into nightmarish organic vessels. Their hulls pulsed with sickly bioluminescence, greens and purples that seemed wrong somehow, like the colors of disease and decay. There were thousands of them, tens of thousands, more ships than Daniel could count, spread across an area of space so vast that light itself would take hours to cross it. And this was just one of 17 target zones. Similar forces were gathering at each of the other communication nodes. "Admiral, what are our chances?" Daniel asked quietly. Lisa considered the question for a moment before answering. "Honestly, better than I expected. They don't know we're coming. They don't know about the Alliance. They don't know about our weapons. For the first time in this entire war, we have the element of surprise." She turned to look at Daniel directly. "But I won't lie to you, Ambassador. A lot of people are going to die today. Human. We're about to fight the largest battle in galactic history, and battles of this scale always have a terrible cost." Daniel nodded slowly. He had known this, of course. He had accepted it when he made his speech to the assembly. But knowing something intellectually and facing it directly were two very different things. "All ships, this is Admiral Grant." Lisa spoke into the fleet-wide communication channel, her voice carrying to every vessel in the human fleet. "You know why we're here. You know what we're fighting for. They believe the galaxy belongs to them. Today, we show them they're wrong." Similar messages were being transmitted from every Allied flagship. High Chancellor addressed the Ambassador, spoke to the Commander, a chorus of voices in a dozen languages, all saying the same thing in different words. "Today, we fight back." Daniel watched as human weapon systems powered up across the fleet. Directed energy weapons that could cut through like knives through paper. Kinetic accelerators that fired projectiles at significant fractions of the speed of light. Torpedoes designed to eat the swarm from the inside out, turning their own biological nature against them. These weapons had never been revealed to the galactic community. They had been developed in secret laboratories on Earth, in hidden research stations scattered throughout the solar system. They represented 18 years of preparation, 18 years of quiet determination, while the rest of the galaxy laughed at humanity's weakness. "Admiral," said, her voice tight with tension, "the delegation wants to know if Ambassador Cooper has any final words before the engagement begins." Daniel considered for a long moment. He thought about everything that had led to this moment. The discovery of faster-than-light travel that had opened the stars to humanity. The shock of learning that they were not alone, that the universe was filled with ancient civilizations that viewed humans as primitives. The decision to prepare in secret, to build a fleet while pretending to be harmless. And now, here they were, about to fight for the survival of the galaxy alongside species that had mocked them just weeks ago. "Tell them this," Daniel said finally. "Humanity spent thousands of years fighting each other because we had no one else to fight. We nearly destroyed ourselves a dozen times over. We created weapons that could end all life on our planet, and we came terrifyingly close to using them." He paused, watching as the first human weapons fired, streaking across the void toward the formation like lines of fire drawn against the darkness. "But we survived. We learned. We evolved beyond our self-destructive impulses, not by eliminating them but by finding better outlets for them. We channeled our fury, our determination, our stubborn refusal to die into something new." The ships began to react to the attack, but they were too slow. The element of surprise had worked. The first human weapons struck their targets and vessels began to die. Explosions blossomed in the darkness, silent flowers of destruction. "Tell them," Daniel continued, "that we're not the primitives they thought we were. We're the species that learned to harness all of its worst impulses and turn them into its greatest strengths. We're the species that refused to give up, no matter how hopeless things seemed." The Allied fleet surged forward, following the human ships into battle. Weapons joined human weapons in the assault. Energy beams sliced through formations. Assault ships darted through gaps in the enemy lines, striking at vulnerable targets. And at the center of the formation, the massive organic structure that served as their communication node began to shudder. Torpedoes were eating it from the inside, disrupting the signals that coordinated the swarm's actions. Ships that had been moving with perfect coordination began to drift randomly, their connection to the hive mind severed. "The node is collapsing," Admiral Grant announced, her voice carrying barely suppressed excitement. "We're receiving reports from the other strike forces. Multiple nodes are under attack. The plan is working." Daniel allowed himself a small smile. It was just the beginning, of course. The war would not be won in a single day, but for the first time in 20 years they were losing. Approached him with tears in her eyes. "Ambassador," the delegate asked what we should tell the galaxy about what's happening here today. Daniel thought for a moment. Then he laughed, a sound that surprised even him. "Tell them that humanity has arrived. Tell them that the primitives they laughed at have just changed the course of galactic history. Tell them that the war is not over, but for the first time, victory is possible." He turned back to the viewport, watching as the battle raged across the stars. "And tell them this is just the beginning. The thought they knew what hunger was, what determination was, what the will to survive looked like. They were wrong." Daniel Cooper, former history professor, current ambassador and reluctant hero, watched as humanity's secret fleet tore through the swarm like a force of nature. "They've never faced anything like us," he said quietly, "and now they never will again." The battle for the galaxy had begun, and humanity was just getting started.